to defeat. It just goes on, and I think that war on terrorism may be the same thing, the offing.
All right, Garrett Utley in New York, thanks very much. Is that right? Is that your feeling too, General Clark, that this will just go on
I'm very
and on
concerned
and on?
about this, and that's
Must
why
we always watch out for terrorism? I mean, we had to before, but even more now till the end of time?
Well, I think there will always be those who somehow react against the United States or other leading powers who are driving the pace of modernization and economic development and technological progress in the world. Whether they will always resort to force and violence to murder our citizens, that's another matter. And I think that it very much depends on how we handle this campaign now. Certainly these people who did this are embittered. They're very ideological and dogmatic, and we're not going to talk them out of what they're doing. So we have to isolate them, cut them off, bring them to justice, or otherwise handle this situation. How we do this will determine whether others follow them. And in that sense, it's a little bit different than the war on drugs because the motivation is different and the consequences are different. This is so shocking. This is so horrifying what's happened in Washington and New York City that we clearly have the moral high ground. We have the ability to mobilize most of the leadership in the entire world to come to our aid to deal with these networks. It's a very tough dilemma the president's in because Americans want rapid action, but it has to be effective action in view of our long-term objectives, not just a spasm of response to satisfy an irate American public. Goodness knows we're all angry about this, but we've got to strike smart.
Effective, and I was just going to say the word you keep using is smart, and the president said this would be a monumental battle between good and evil, but that good would win out, and the president is under an enormous amount of pressure.
Yes.
Major Garrett at the White House.
Donna, let me tackle this from a couple of different angles. Picking up on Garrett's first point about the pressure he believes the president is under. Clearly the White House feels it. Senior advisors to the president feel it. But I commend to all of us the president's first statement from the Oval Office on that Tuesday night after he returned to the Oval Office from traveling around the country because of the very real security danger afflicting and focused on Air Force One. There were several drafts of that speech, I have been told, many of them much tougher than the speech the president delivered. Much, much tougher, I have been told by some senior White House advisors. The president toned those remarks down. He did not want to strike an immediate tone of vengeance or bloodlust from the Oval Office. What he wanted to try to do was send as calm and as reassuring signal as he could to the nation and to the rest of the world about the temperate and balanced approach he was going to take. Any president under those circumstances would have felt the very real compulsion to talk in words of vengeance, to sort of strike at that very real sense of outrage and horror all Americans felt. The president decided that he would do it a bit differently, and there was some internal second-guessing the next day within the White House. Was he strong enough? Did he strike as strong a note as the American public needed, they thought, some thought, the public needed to hear? The president had no second-guessing about that statement, and he has gradually stepped up the rhetoric in consistent methodology, we are told, as the military apparatus, as the intelligence service has gathered more information, and the president has become more internally confident about his ability to deal with this situation in a timely and effective manner. So I would only refer the nation to the president's own remarks, and you have seen him move in a direction steadily. But he resisted the temptation on that very first evening to be harsh and bellicose, even though some of those very type words were laid before him as options. He rejected them. And on Garrett's other point about the drug war, I can tell you this. The White House sees no analogy whatsoever, and in fact has spoken about the drug war in different terms. This president has often, even in the company of leaders from Peruvian countries who suffer much more gravely the real tragedies of the drug war than many Americans do, about the fault that lies in America on the demand side of this equation. So he's even spoken differently about the drug war. But this is not analogous in any way at this Bush White House. The victims of the terrorism attacks on Tuesday were innocent American civilians who never once brought anything approaching the harm that fell upon them in their direction, as the president has often argued Americans do who take drugs. So they don't see any analogy whatsoever with the drug war or its protracted and in some cases endless struggle. They do believe and are becoming ever more confident that they can find those responsible for these acts of terrorism and bring about, as the president has said, justice.
Major
Donna?
Garrett, Major, thanks very much. Let's go to Jeremiah in Georgia on the phone with us right now. Jeremiah?
I was calling towards the question of if we should take retaliation.
Jeremiah, could you start over for a minute? I missed the first part of what you were saying. Could you start over, please?
Yeah, I was calling in for the question, should we retaliate or not? I believe we should, because they were able to penetrate our security at the airport, and we were supposed to have a strong security then. Who says they're not going to be stupid enough or gutsy enough to try it again in a different form? You know, who says they're not going to put a bomb there in a car or something wild and crazy? Where do they come with these ideas anyway, and what have we done wrong to them for them to kill thousands of our innocent citizens for no reason?
General Clark, there's been some talk about, wondering who the enemy is, and I saw some wire reports and some of our reporting talking about that there were worries now still that perhaps this isn't all over and done with, that they were worried about further terrorist attacks and maybe in different forms. And we've had the first arrest, I think you've known with the updates on news here that we've been telling you about, one of the arrests of one of the people who was taken into custody, I believe, at one of the two New York airports on Thursday evening. I think it was JFK or LaGuardia. Those were, they took in like 10 or 12 people, and now they've had the first arrest. So what do you do to watch out, like Jeremiah says, for what could be coming in the next wave?
Well, you have to go back and go through a security analysis of all of your vulnerable systems. The airports, certainly, but also other things, our utilities, our public services. There's much more horrifying scenarios that could be constructed than what happened. And we need to make sure those scenarios never happen. So that's the first battle we're waging right now in the United States. Now, we don't know if we're winning or not, but we've got to do our best.
Well, I saw, too, the FBI was saying, although this person did not pass the lie detector test, so they're saying that perhaps this isn't accurate as they thought before, but there was a warning that maybe Boston, Atlanta, Richmond, Virginia might have also been targets during Tuesday's attacks. So now they wonder, because he didn't pass the lie detector test where they got some of this information, but they were talking about people are worried who work in skyscrapers. You know, they're nervous about that, and that gun sales are up. Particularly, they're edgy in Boston, where the first two planes that hit the World Trade Center towers hit.
Well, I think it would be really surprising if he only had 4 teams, and 3 of the 4 teams took over and were successful, in this case with these aircraft. So we don't know how many teams there really were and how many people were fleeing across the country trying to get away or waiting to try it in a different manner.
I'm sorry, Rick, could you tell me who the next caller is? Once again, Laura, Arizona. Hi, Arizona. Go right ahead.
Yeah, my point is, first of all, I really hope President Bush understands that we will be patient enough for them to do the smart thing. And I don't think the question is if we should retaliate. I think it's going to be how we're going to retaliate, because I believe as a world we're trying to unite, to come together. This is the extortionist, and we need... Any terrorist is just an extortionist. We need to, number one, figure out how to take away their power, how to really get to them as a world. We're all not going to put up with this. If some country wants to declare war, they need to declare war on us, like we're saying. Who are we going to retaliate against? An individual? And so I think they're on the right track. They're going to do the right thing, and I think most Americans have complete confidence in our leaders, and they're all seeming that they're going to get it right this time.
Laura
and
from Arizona.
I'm confident.
Thank you very much for your call. Did you finish your thought? Were you able to finish your thought there?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
But I think everyone so far, I think that our country's finally going to pull together, like the general said, and lead the world in showing how to get rid of terrorists once and for all, because you let extortionists in, they're going to keep doing it.
General Clark, what about that? You were involved, as we said before, 5 years. You trained leaders and soldiers, and many of them went to Desert Storm. How is the patience factor? Laura mentioned that, the United States, folks in the United States, she feels a lot of them would be patient. What do you think?
Well,
Is there
patience
patience?
factor in the armed forces is great. the
Right. How
patience
about the
factor in the
general
American public? Well, I think we're going to go through a certain set of stages after this campaign. I mean, first we're angry right now, and we're grieving right now. But I think as more of the facts come out, I think people will rally behind the president. He's going to set the pace of this based on the information that's given to him, what our capabilities are, and what makes sense, and I think the American people will support him. I think we're a mature population, and I think we certainly can hold our horses until we do the right thing in this.
General Clark, we're glad to have you here with us in Atlanta, our military consultant and former NATO commander. Thank you very much. As we carry on here, news that we've been bringing you, now they have 4 of the black boxes that have been found. One from the plane that hit the Pentagon and one from the plane that went down in Pennsylvania. Let's get the latest news for you with Jim Clancy and Colleen McEdwards. Jim and Colleen?
All right, Donna, interesting discussion. We're going to now give you a bit of a profile of the man that's the leading suspect and also take you to a country that is certainly going to be a key player in all of this.
That's right. We begin with Osama bin Laden. The man that some Bush administration officials are calling the prime suspect has long been at the top of the U.S. list of major sponsors of terrorism. Andrea Koppel looks at what the U.S. response might be if bin Laden were to be the target.
If, as the U.S. suggests, Osama bin Laden was the mastermind behind Tuesday's attacks, going after him and shutting down his al-Qaeda terrorist network will require more than just a military assault on Afghanistan. That's because over the years, al-Qaeda has become an international network with cells rooted in almost every region of the world. That's why Secretary of State Colin Powell has put the world on notice. The United States needs help.
I am not threatening so much as I am saying this has become a new benchmark, a new way of measuring the relationship and what we can do together in the future.
Since Tuesday, Powell has had the world on speed dial, in particular reaching out to countries where the U.S. says Islamic militant groups have links to bin Laden's network.
Once these people have been trained in Afghanistan, we know that they've gone to Africa, we know that they've gone to Asia, we know that they've gone back to the Middle East, and it's clear now that they've also come to the United States.
People like Ahmed Rassam, the man charged with attempting to bomb the United States over the millennium. He's a member of Algeria's armed Islamic group, but was trained by bin Laden. So were members of Pakistan's Harak-ul-Mujahideen group, which hijacked an Indian jetliner to Afghanistan in December 1999. On Friday, Pakistan's president informed the U.S. his country is prepared to take specific steps to help the U.S. wage its campaign against bin Laden. And in the Arab world, Powell has asked countries like Saudi Arabia to cut off the flow of money and resources to bin Laden. For Secretary Powell, who led Allied troops to victory in the Gulf War, this war against terrorists will be fought on an entirely different battlefield.
And so you have to design a campaign plan that goes after that kind of enemy. And it isn't always blunt force military, although that is certainly an option.
But diplomatic sources say whatever option the U.S. chooses to take, it will need the support of Islamic countries. Such support would send a strong message to bin Laden and his Islamic extremist supporters around the world. They have nowhere to hide. Andrea Koppel, CNN, at the State Department.
Now, as we have reported, the United States has presented Pakistan with ways that it could help in the aftermath of Tuesday's attacks. Friday, Pakistan's leadership pledged to, quote, fully cooperate. Officials in Washington, though, want to know how the broader military leadership there thinks. CNN's Tom Mentir is in Pakistan. He joins us now with more on that. Tom?
Jim, in the next 3/4 of an hour, we should know better what that level of cooperation between Pakistan and the United States will be. There is a National Security Council and a cabinet meeting that will be going on to discuss a meeting that occurred yesterday with all of the top military commanders, a lengthy meeting. At the end of the meeting, according to the Ministry of Information, they were unanimous in condemning terrorism and pledging the support to the United States. Now, the United States has put a list of specific demands to the Pakistani government, closing its door with with Afghanistan, stopping fuel supplies to the Taliban, and also, if required, allowing U.S. planes to fly over Pakistani airspace. In addition to that, possibly even more important is to provide human intelligence to the United States about Osama bin Laden. In 1998, when cruise missiles rained down on Afghanistan, they were largely ineffective because they didn't have that type of cooperation. Pakistan has pledged full cooperation with the United States. What they're waiting for, I'm sure, in the State Department right now in the Pentagon is what that level of cooperation is, what will be allowed and what will not be allowed. But we should know later this afternoon, the Pakistani government has said they will announce publicly what they are going to be doing. They will bring basically the entire country into its confidence, telling them up front what the level of cooperation will be with the United States. But the Pakistani president has a very difficult line to walk, helping the United States into counterterrorism and keeping domestic situation at home calm. So we should know in the next couple of hours what those steps that the Pakistani government is going to afford to the United States if and when a military strike is involved, what will be allowed to happen here, and how the Pakistani government will assist the United States. Jim?
Briefly, Tom, if the United States, if President Bush wants to build a coalition, is there any country more important than Pakistan?
I think there's probably no country as important and as critical to any operation as Pakistan, because they indeed do have the best human intelligence on the ground because of the close ties with the Taliban. I think that Saudi Arabia could also play a major role in the Islamic world because Saudi Arabia has experience in dealing with the United States. If the Saudis are seen to be on board, and supposedly a Saudi diplomat is coming to Pakistan today or tomorrow to meet with the government officials to discuss the level of cooperation. So I think Pakistan is probably number one, and Saudi Arabia is probably number two in the list of importance to the United States in this coalition effort.
All right, Tom Mintier, thank you for that update.
And of course, we will go back to Tom Mintier if there are any developments out of Pakistan on that issue of support. But for now, we want to toss it back to Donna. Donna?
All right, Jim and Colleen, thanks very much. As we carry on here, the world, much of the world, shares America's grief, and it also shares its concern that terrorists can strike anytime, anywhere. Have the terror attacks shaken your sense of security? Well, taking your questions and comments is MJ Gohil of the Asia Pacific Foundation. It's a London-based policy assessment group that focuses on security and terrorism issues. And you can start calling us back if you'd like right now. The number in the United States is 1-404-221-1855. Mr. Gohil, thank you very much for joining us. How strong do you think the cells and the networks of terrorists are around the globe?
I think one of the most important issues that has come out of this awful tragedy is the appreciation and realization that there is a network. It's just not enough to bomb one or two camps in Afghanistan or dismantle the camps and the madrasas, the religious schools in Pakistan. There is an international network that stretches out to Western Europe and to the USA through affiliate companies, through cultural organizations, for the recruitment of both funds and personnel.
Well, as you probably have heard, the president has said that there will be no distinction between the terrorists and those who harbor them. Our Tom Mintier was just reporting from Pakistan that perhaps Saudi Arabia and Pakistan are two of the most important countries to get on board for support. Where do you think most of the terrorists are, and who's important to get on board?
The brain center for the terrorism is undoubtedly in Afghanistan, and the recruitment is done through some of the madrasas. These are the religious schools, and there are several thousand of these in Pakistan. The terrorist groups at one time in the 60s and 70s, were based in the Middle East, but during the 80s, the shift has been towards Central and South Asia. The training, the brain center is in Afghanistan, but the reach is all over the world. The bombings in Africa, the attack on USS Cole, is an indication of the kind of reach that these groups have. And one is dealing here not just with one group, one is dealing here with dozens of groups with different leaderships. There isn't any one single leader. It's quite a big problem, this.
Well, and as you say, worldwide reach, because as one of the diplomats was quoted on a story today that I saw, never dreamed, or words to the effect, never dreamed that a terror attack like this could happen in the United States. Let's go to a caller for you. Tracy from Pennsylvania. Tracy?
Hi.
Go right ahead.
How are you?
Good. Go right ahead.
I was calling from Philadelphia. Our schools were closed Wednesday here, and I was glad to have them. I was home with my son, by ourselves, just trying to explain to him what was going on. He just thought it was an accident. Mommy, what's this accident? You know.
How old is your son, Tracy?
He just turned 11 in July.
And was he worried?
Oh, at first, no, because he thought it was an accident. You know, Mommy, what's this accident? Mommy, what's this accident?
What did you
And
explain to him? Well, how did you explain terrorism?
It's very, very hard. You can't explain terrorism to a child. Terrorism to an adult, we understand. We've seen Beirut, Lebanon. We've seen what goes on in Iraq and Iran. But my child doesn't know anything about that. You know, and I'm trying to explain to him that some people were mad. They were angry. They don't like how we run our government or how our government has influence on their countries. And he's still like, well, what? What are you talking about? He doesn't get it, you know?
What about that, Mr. Gohel? How do you explain that to a child or to an adult? How do you explain the mindset of a terrorist or of terrorism?
This is, I mean, how on earth would you explain what's happened even to an adult? I still am trying to reconcile myself with the horrific pictures that I've seen since Tuesday. To put the whole issue in perspective, America has been through 2 world wars, but did not suffer any attack on its mainland. And when Japan, the entire Japanese Air Force, attacked Pearl Harbor on the Day of Infamy, some 2,000 people were killed. Now here, on a normal day, without any declaration of war, without the use of any kind of Air Force jets, at least over 5,000 people have died. The only way to understand this is to accept that you're dealing here with a group of people whose loyalty is to an ideology and not to any country. There is nothing tangible here. You can't negotiate with them because there's nothing you can offer them. It's not a territorial dispute. It's not localized. It's a battle of ideologies, a battle between a group of people who believe in a very fundamentalist lifestyle and who see the free world, the democratic world, and America as a leader of that free world to be the enemy. It's a battle of ideologies.
Let's bring in one of our international correspondents who's been in war zones before. Alessio Vinci is joining us, and he is in New York. Alessio.
Well, yes, I'm in New York, and I would have never thought of covering a war zone-like situation in the middle of Manhattan. It's really a situation that you heard in the last hour or so, everybody talking about the war, about whether there should be retaliation, whether it should be strong or whether it should be measured. And it's quite incredible walking here in downtown Manhattan, and at least in the area that has been sealed off by the police and by the army. Walking around earlier this morning, for example, I was going along an empty street and I saw a column of military Humvees driving by me, and I certainly at that moment felt that I was back in Bosnia or in Kosovo or in Chechnya, and it was quite incredible thinking that at that moment I was on Canal Street in the middle of Manhattan. And as I'm speaking to you now, I'm hearing helicopters hovering overhead. At times there is a military jet patrolling the skies. Certainly all situations that we have been experiencing far away from the United States, namely in Kosovo or in Macedonia recently or in Yugoslavia. It's quite an incredible situation to be here in the middle of Manhattan covering a situation that looks very much like a war zone.
Alessio, I don't know if you had time to talk with people where you were. I don't know if you were in Rome or where you were before you came to New York, because you're based, I think, now in Rome, but you've been certainly in Yugoslavia and in Bosnia. Did you have a chance to talk to people in Europe to ask them how they felt about an attack that happened on U.S. soil?
Yes, I have, and there are two things that often come up. The first one is the fact that everybody recognizes in Europe that this is the first time, as one of our callers, I believe, was reminding us, that the first time that the Americans are suffering an attack on their mainland. And a lot of the people, especially, I must say, some of the friends and the people that I know in Yugoslavia, are telling me, well, now the Americans too know what it means to suffer and to have victims. Of course, this attack is of a completely different nature, and the sheer number of people who are believed to be dead, 5,000, I mean, we haven't had that number of civilian casualties throughout the entire Yugoslavia, NATO bombing campaign on Yugoslavia, so certainly you cannot compare the two things, but a lot of the people overseas are telling me that perhaps the Americans will start feeling a little bit about what it means to be the victims of such an attack. But mainly what everybody's telling me is that, you know, asking me, how are the Americans feeling? How are they coping with this? And one thing I was noticing today when President George Bush arrived here to see all those firefighters chanting USA, 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 I would have never really believed that something like this could have happened so spontaneously. Again, covering many wars in the Balkans, how many times I've seen hardline nationalist Serbs chanting Serbia, 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 and I thought that was something perhaps a little bit negative. But in this case, to see this group of firefighters and rescue workers chanting USA, USA, and again, in the middle of Manhattan, I mean, I must stress this fact, and I don't know how many times I can really say it. To be here in the heart of New York and to look at what's happening behind me, huge cranes, 2 collapsed buildings, 2 planes that collapse into it, it's just incredible. I myself cannot believe it.
Are there some people, Alessio, who does it make them more fearful that a terrorist attack could happen to them, and what could happen now on international soil as well?
Well, you know, in Europe, especially in the 70s, and there has been a lot of terrorist attacks in Germany, in Italy. So certainly people,
the airports.
Yes, and the airport in Italy, of course. So terrorism has struck Italy and Germany, and to some extent France, and you know, every day in the news today. Take, for example, the bombing, what's happening in Macedonia or in Northern Ireland or in Corsica. I mean, there are many, or in the Basque region. I mean, there are many areas in Europe today where not this kind of attack, again, this is possibly the largest terrorist attack, I think, in history. I cannot imagine where one single attack has killed so many people. So certainly the Europeans are a little more familiar with what terrorism means. Whether they're more fearful, I don't think so, because, you know, in this kind of situation, usually the level of security increases and then the likelihood of a new attack decreases. But certainly they are watching a lot more carefully about perhaps where to stay, and especially in the areas where there is high risk of more attacks, namely the airport, for example.
Mm-hmm. And we're looking at a live picture of the Pentagon as we continue to visit here this evening. Tom in New Mexico is on the phone with us. Tom? Hi, Tom. Would you go ahead, please? Are you there?
No.
No, I think we've lost Tom. I'm sorry. Brian in Chicago, would you go ahead, please?
I just wanted to say that I'm completely behind President Bush's campaign to approve the $10 billion for the airlines and improving security, as far as fortifying the doors, putting marshals on planes, and restricting passengers from ticket-only places to kind of cut down on the traffic for the, you know, the security guards, so they can do a better job to prevent this from happening.
And no curbside check-in. That's one of the other new rules.
Yeah, I didn't completely understand the rationale for that, because I don't think they're matching up passengers with the baggage.
Well, I think that what they're trying to do is keep the baggage with the people and make sure that they're matching up. But they used to do that, I thought, at curbside too, when you mentioned that. But that's one of the new rules that they want in effect, and so that's one of the new ones that they'll do for security. Mr. Gohult, to get back into you, and we talk about some of these extra measures that are being talked about for security at airports. What do you think needs to be done? What steps need to be taken to help root out terrorists?
Firstly, I think there has to be an international response to this. This is a menace that the entire world is facing. America has suffered great losses on Tuesday, but terrorism has been there in South and Central Asia since about 1989. And the irony is that a terrorist can only operate freely in a democratic society. When the Soviet Union collapsed, it made the borders a lot more easy to cross, and terrorists are now able to move around freely. They're able to, a policeman, for instance, cannot stop someone unless he has a warrant or he has reasons for suspicion. And there are so many buildings around the world, there's so many people all over the world. How does one protect every single individual? But some steps can be taken as far as airlines are concerned. One thing that could be done, it may be difficult to do, is to prevent any kind of access from the passenger area into the cockpit area, even if this means creating a separate entry and exit for the cockpit crew, so that there is no way an aeroplane can ever be used as a missile, as it was done. Other than that, it's a question of rooting out the terrorist network. It's a question of pursuing these people wherever they are and eliminating and eradicating the training camps, the infrastructure, and the leadership. And for this, the entire international community will have to work together.
Our great thanks to you, MJ Gohel of the Asia Pacific Foundation. We thank you very much. You focus on security and terrorism issues, and we're glad you could come to visit with us today. Thanks very much. You know, if adults feel insecure, how much more so must children feel? From the first moments of the attack, we have seen one disturbing image after another, the planes piercing those towers, the World Trade Center towers, like flaming arrows, people jumping from buildings that moments later crumbled into a storm of debris. How can we describe to our children what is happening in terms that they understand without taking away the security that they need to feel? We're going to talk about that in just a moment. First, though, let's go back to Jim Clancy and Colleen McEdwards for the latest news on the investigation into the attacks and certainly the search and rescue and recovery mission. Jim and Colleen?
It's a great topic, isn't it, Don? I know a lot of my friends are talking about how they talk to their kids about this. What do you say? What do you do?
You have to be thinking about that and addressing it and talking to your children. Probably get some good tips here in the coming minutes, but let's get up to date with the latest developments in the story itself. Searchers have recovered the cockpit voice recorder from the hijacked plane that crashed in western Pennsylvania. It was recovered at the bottom of a deep crater. Now it's being sent to Washington for analysis. This was the plane that is believed to have crashed after a struggle between passengers and the hijackers.
And in other developments, Congress has passed a joint resolution authorizing President Bush to use military force against those responsible for the attacks.
And authorities say that they've made their first arrest in the investigation, a person who was picked up as a material witness. Well, a resolution was passed by Congress that had been delayed by a dispute over the text. The House finally approved a measure late Friday, 420 to 1, endorsing the president's ability to act militarily. Representative Barbara Lee was the lone dissenter. The California Democrats saying military action will not prevent international terrorism against the U.S. The Senate had already voted unanimously in favor of that resolution. One senator says the body is single-minded in its desire for action.
10 years ago, I helped draft the resolution that George Bush, then president, won the Gulf War with our coalition allies. It was 3 days and 3 nights of ferocious debate on the Senate floor, and it prevailed by only 5 votes. This one is 100 votes. What clear evidence, Senator Levin and I worked on the drafting with our leadership of this, what clear evidence of the unity in the Congress, and the Congress speak for the people of the United States.
Meanwhile, at the request of the Defense Department, Mr. Bush has given the go-ahead for as many as 50,000 National Guardsmen and reservists to assist with so-called homeland defense plans.
And the president got a first-hand look at the site in Lower Manhattan known as Ground Zero. Amid the rubble of the Twin Towers, Mr. Bush spoke to rescue workers who responded patriotically. Take a look.
Got it. I want you all to know it can't go any louder. I want you all to know that America today is on bended knee in prayer for the people whose lives were lost here, for the workers who work here, for the families who mourn. This nation stands with the good people of New York City and New Jersey and Connecticut as we mourn the loss of thousands of our citizens. I can hear you. I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon. The nation sends its love
Harry, by pushing
and compassion
No, sorry.
to everybody who is here.
Cross the line on that one.
Thank you for your hard work. Thank you for making the nation proud. And may God bless America.
All right, let's get back a little bit, folks.
You can imagine what a morale booster that was, because the pressure on those folks, the search, rescue, and recovery teams, has been just unrelenting. The search is a race against the clock to reach anyone who could still be alive in that pile of rubble. For one blind survivor who managed to get down hundreds of feet of stairs in the chaos with his guide dog, memories of that attack still very fresh. Listen.
Was very concerned. I didn't hear the second plane hit, but we knew that at that time something had happened. We figured that a plane had hit the building because I could smell, and we all could smell jet fuel fumes. So we knew there was something going on.
And it is the victims and their families that were the focus of Friday's National Day of Prayer and Remembrance, designated by U.S. President George Bush. At the National Cathedral in Washington, patriotic songs led the way as Mr. Bush joined 4 past presidents and other dignitaries in a display of grief and an attempt to comfort as well. Prayers and services were offered in other churches, synagogues, mosques, and public squares right across the country. In Las Vegas, the bright neon lights dimmed as the Nevada city paid its respects as well. Farther west in the state of Washington, candles flickered at a Seattle vigil to remember the lives lost and affected by those terrorist attacks. Well, it's a struggle for anyone to come to terms with this week's horrible loss of life, but children have to rely on their parents or other adults to help them cope with their grief and their fear. The terrifying nature of these attacks has prompted schools to enlist the help of counselors for the kids. Thomas Nybo has that.
You want to protect your kids. They're small and the world is big, and sometimes very bad things happen to good people, even when they wear a helmet and look both ways. If things go wrong, horribly wrong, what do you do? On the first day back to class since the attacks, the tragedy was very much on the minds of New Yorkers. For this father, a reminder of how a 7-year-old sees the world.
He was quite intrigued that the Empire State Building is now the second tallest building. And he kept saying that over and over again. So, and that's appropriate. And I had to kind of scale back and not try and lecture him on the significance of the event. He's 7. He's dealing with it the way a 7-year-old should.
For Steve Ross's 13-year-old daughter, a complicated start to a new school year.
It's hard to get now back into the routine. We hadn't figured out a routine to begin with yet, so to try to get back to a routine that was never there is kind of difficult.
Even for someone who's made the United States a recent home, similar issues with her 10-year-old son.
He made up that he was fighting against the terrorists, so he was working with like fake guns at home and hiding behind furniture and just making up like how he will defend the country.
Around the corner, long after classes had ended for the day, a private school for girls held a crash course for parents on how to help your child face the unthinkable. Counselors offered ways to listen when your child isn't speaking.
We have children who are not necessarily the most verbal, some who are not able to articulate things in words. We need to take a look at the drawings they draw, the way they play with their dolls in their room, things that they may be saying to their friends.
we basically shielded her from the whole thing.
Questions from parents looking for ways to explain to their children what really happened.
Terrible evil happened in the world. A very, very bad thing took place, and we're all doing our best to get back to a comfort and a safety.
The final questions come in a flurry. They needed to get home early. It was, after all, a school night. Thomas Nybo, CNN, New York.
And that should be a good opening to this next segment in our discussion, reactions to what's been going on over the last 4 days. Now back to Donna.
Jim, you're so right, and Colleen, thanks very much. We'll carry on with the children. Certainly, you want to protect your children from evil. We do, but it would be really almost impossible to shield them from what's been happening in New York City and Washington. How should we be talking with our children about these tragedies? From Los Angeles, we are joined by child psychologist Robert Butterworth. Dr. Butterworth has assisted radio, TV, and print media since 1984 to try and enhance the understanding, really, of what a child goes through when they get into a psychological issue and the trauma that they face. Dr. Butterworth, thanks for coming to talk with us.
Hello, Donna.
First things first, what do you do? Maybe they've seen the images, so how do you open the door with a child?
Well, first of all, you know why it's so hard? Because for all these adults that are struggling, because in a sense we fail them. You know, we bring these children into the world and we give them this perception that all is well, everyone is good, and all of a sudden something like this happens. So the child that runs up to my wife, who's a teacher, who's 10 years old, it says something like, "What did we do that made them so mad?" Or the other child that is so quiet in the play and won't say anything, but builds little blocks like a tower and then smashes them down.
So they're afraid they're in trouble? Or they've done something?
Well, you know, the problem is that, in a sense, little children don't verbalize. We don't sit and talk like you and I do with little children. They won't talk to you. But what you'll do is get some paper, get some crayons, get some pencils, and say, "Gee, what's been happening on TV?" When they draw, they'll talk. And then you'll find out what they think. And even those kids that aren't talking about it, there's something in their head and they're thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. Should you force a child to talk if they're not talking to you? Should you try to draw them out?
No, that's why we're using play, because by playing with them, they're having fun anyhow.
At a certain age, like you're saying, the younger kids, you need the paper and crayons, so maybe we could kind of make it age appropriate.
Okay, that's what we're going to talk. Okay, the drawings and the play and all that, we're about 7 and younger.
Mm-hmm.
From about 7 to 12, a lot of kids are going to be kind of stuck on one thing. Remember, it used to be with post-traumatic stress that you would get it if you were exposed to it, if you were there, and you couldn't get the image out of your head. But in this new technology, you don't have to be there. You can be exposed in your living room. You're sitting there watching these buildings come down and people jumping. So there are a lot of kids that are quiet, but they want to talk about it. So what you do is you spend a little time, and you know, even at the age of about 7 to 12, they're not going to sit and talk, but maybe at the dinner table, have a little briefing. Everybody goes around the table and says how they feel about it. And if everybody else does it, maybe the kids will start to open up.
Mm-hmm. One of the most important words, listen, right?
And it's hard, and as we get, especially with the older ones, because the older ones are going to be arguing. Remember, teenagers want action. They want something to happen, and they may be mad at mom and dad. Why didn't you fix this? Or well, let's get them. So there's a lot more anger and a lot more energy and a lot more intensity.
We're going to talk about some of those emotions. Let's get a call in here. Liz from West Virginia. Hi.
Hi. When I put my daughter to bed tonight, she just kind of looked at me with tears in her eyes, and she asked me, "Mommy, why does this man hate us so much?" What am I supposed to say to that child? She's only 9.
Bob?
Yeah?
What should she say? She put her daughter to bed, 9 years old. She was in tears saying, "Why does this man hate us so much?" And she wants to know what she can do.
Okay, well, first of all, you have to remember that most of the kids that are going to be having problems are going to be having problems at nighttime. No matter what happens in the daytime, they keep busy. And at night, this is where all the fears come up. You really have to say that there are bad people in the world, but most of the people are good. The people around you are good. The people that, you know, you go to school with are good. And you have to kind of, in a sense, drown out the bad with the good. There's no perfect answer. But by letting them know that their environment and their surroundings are filled with good people, and there are bad people, they can cope because they put it in some sort of perspective. But nighttime is going to be difficult because that's when things get dark. Remember, all the kids' fears come out and all their little fantasies.
Okay, so we talk about fear, loss. Maybe some kids have lost their parents, and I've seen some of the women who are even expecting babies who will never know their fathers. There's hate, there's anger, there's sadness, and I know it depends on the child and depends on the age. What would you recommend to really? Is there kind of something that a point that you can start that really makes sense for a lot of kids that they really will understand to cover a range of emotions?
Well, depending on what the emotion is, because remember with children, when they feel stress, it's completely different than adults. When adults are under stress and depression, they slow down. Kids speed up. So kids are going to be fighting, they're going to be hyper, they're going to have difficulty concentrating. They're also going to have problems physically, appetite. They're going to be crying, they're going to be clinging. So all these things happen with kids, and you just deal with each one at one time. With the food, maybe have different feedings. With the bed, maybe have them sleep closer to you. With the concentration, maybe limit school. But generally with most kids who haven't lost a parent, who haven't been exposed directly to the threat, these things should even off. But Donna, the problem is, in most tragedies, things start to even off, but things are going so fast. We're just finishing with this, and all of a sudden we're talking about war. So in a sense, now kids are getting frightened, not because of the images that they see, but all this talk of war, and that's another trauma coming down the road.
Try to keep to as normal a routine as you can, but be flexible if they need you or want to sleep in the same bed with mommy and daddy. That's okay?
Research in all types of tragedies, all types of devastation. One thing keeps coming up. Try to remember as much as you can to get back to normal routine. Anything that has to do with structure, anything that has to do with the way things were before, that's so important.
Okay, on the phone with us is Holly from Arkansas. Hi, Holly. What's your question?
Hello. Yes, my children, when I brought them home from school, I had
Donna,
sat them
I'm not
down
hearing the
and I
question.
had told them everything. I did not lie to them. I told them everything. They are only 8 and 9 years old, and I was wondering, was that an appropriate thing for me to do?
You did tell them everything, you say?
Yes, ma'am.
And probably in a way that was, you said they were 8 and 10?
8 and 9.
8 and 9, okay. And were they frightened?
My 9-year-old started crying, and I asked her, I said, you need to let me know what you're afraid of.
Okay.
That way that I can explain it to her.
Okay, let me. I think Dr. Butterworth is having trouble hearing our caller. So
now it's fine.
Okay. Well, Holly in Arkansas said that she has the 8 and 9-year-old. If you missed the first part of it, and they were asking her about it, and she told them really in a way she thought was appropriate. Told them everything, and she said, should she have? Was that the right thing to do?
Yes, and a lot of people don't like this. They would like to say, you know, why shouldn't we just protect our children from this? Let's turn off the TV. Let's pretend it's not happening.
But
and
shouldn't
everything
you,
will
at
go away.
a certain age and a certain amount that you tell them, is there a protection factor that should come up there?
Well, obviously the protection factor are kids that aren't exposed to other kids that aren't going to school yet, and that's obviously kids under kindergarten and that way. But the problem is for not talking about it and not discussing it, kids go back into the school, kids go back into their environment, and let's face it, this is the biggest story in the last 50 years. We're not going to hide it. And remember, it's what kids don't know that hurt them, not what they know. And if you don't tell them the facts, they'll fantasize their own version of reality, which in many cases is much worse than the events that are occurring.
I've got a baby and a 20-year-old. Major Garrett, I know you have a couple of kids. Are they extra worried? What have you told them? Because you're covering the White House, and if they heard maybe that the White House might have been a target and the president was in danger, are they worried about Daddy?
Well, Don, I have 3 children, 6, 4, and 17 months. And Mr. Butterworth might argue with my methods here, but I have imposed a complete news blackout at my house.
Do they know anything about it before you impose the blackout?
Well, my son Luke, who's 4, the day that this tragedy happened, came home from school early. And he said to my wife, Julie, I heard there was an explosion. Can we get some popcorn so we can sit and watch it on television? He thought it was fireworks. That's how my 4-year-old reacted. He thought this was about fireworks. And I was not at home at the time. I was in Sarasota, Florida. covering the president, and my wife and I talked about this a good deal, and I said, look, we cannot explain this to them. They're 6 and 4. I'm at the White House. The president is under a higher degree of threat than he's ever been, and I don't want them to worry about me, and I don't want them to get the sense that the world is crashing down around them. Thirdly, we travel to California twice a year to see their grandparents. We fly by plane. I in no way wanted them to see pictures of airplanes crashing into buildings, because I want them to associate everything about these trips positively. Getting on a plane to see their grandparents. It's a big ritual for us. It's a huge deal twice a year to make this trip.
And I'll tell you, Major, I think a lot of people would agree with you, but that's what Dr. Butterworth was just saying. Dr. Butterworth, what about that? In fact, you say your 4-year-old came home and had already found out about it. What about that? Major would rather that his children not know about this, particularly flying to see the grandparents, and keep it a pleasant and lovely experience. And he would rather that they not find out anything about it.
And for the 4-year-old, that's probably workable. And he's right. I'd rather that his children not find out about it either. But the problem with the 6-year-old, if the 6-year-old's in school, when the parents aren't there, they're going to be talking about it. Then what do you do?
Yeah,
what do
Major,
you do
what's your plan
back?
B?
Well, Mary Ellen, my 6-year-old, has been back at school just for one day, Thursday. She was off Wednesday, as many classes were around the country. She was also off today, as it happened, because there was a teacher training day built into the schedule. So she's only been at school for one day this week, and it really wasn't a big topic of conversation in her first grade class. And my decision and my wife's decision has not been to lead with this information, not to bring it to her attention. We haven't had the radio on. What television we have had on has been movies on the VCR. And I'll tell you, there was one poignant moment. We were watching The Sound of Music, which has become a very popular movie with my 2 children. They know all the songs. And Mary Ellen, my daughter, said, you know, why did the Von Trapp family have to leave Austria? Why did they want to come to America? And of course, that's a myth built into the movie that the Von Trapp family fled not the Nazi occupation of Austria by climbing over the mountains, but nevertheless it's an important part of the movie. And here I am explaining to her the importance of someone at another time coming to America for freedom and liberty and a chance to live a life of their dreams, while in my professional life I'm dealing with the fact that thousands of my countrymen have been killed for that very same reason amidst this horror. And personally, I'm dealing with that much more than she is, and I'll take that burden and try to spare her from it as much as I can.
Let's talk to Betsy in Virginia. She's a teacher. Betsy, hello.
Hi. I'm a 6th grade teacher, and I'm just wondering how much is appropriate for me to discuss at school opposed to what they're hearing at home.
Betsy, did you say 5th or 6th grade? I'm sorry.
6th grade. They're in an elementary school, but they're 6th grade.
Okay. Bob, what do you think? What's appropriate
let's
there?
see. They're 6th grade, so they're probably about 12 years old. Probably the best thing to do, because kids get a little nervous and anxious, and they kind of never know when to talk about it, when not to. Maybe, again, talking about this with your school, set a little period of time every day. Call it a news briefing. And sit down, make sure you have maps, because you need to put things in perspective, where things are happening, and let them just talk about it. But it's a special time every day, the same time. You don't necessarily show the images. You just talk about how you're feeling, and you try to correct the errors that they may have. Remember, kids sometimes don't know geography, so they may think, oh my God, the buildings are dropping not hundreds of miles away, but blocks away. So those kinds of misconceptions can be cleared up. But again, one has to be kind of careful about this, because some parents may get upset. And that's why my feeling is it's probably better for the parent to do it, only because in our society, the parents have to do the tough job. And the tough job is breaking news to kids that this is not always a happy and pleasant world.
And as we mentioned before, the president talked about how it would be a monumental battle between the forces of evil and good, but that good would win out. Do you address that? Do you talk about evil versus good?
My God, it sounds like a Star Wars scenario, but you know, that's how kids are understanding this. I mean, kids don't have any history or any sense of war in reality. They see war on television, they see war in movies, and they have these battles between good and evil. And I think kids have that sense, but I think you have to just slowly approach that and let the child lead. And please, if a child doesn't want to talk about it and they get really upset, stop and say, yes, but when you do want to talk, I'm here.
Another phone call, Chip from Philadelphia. Hi, Chip.
Hi.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, I'm a father and a grandfather, and I've learned a long time ago that children are born to love. You really have to work hard to teach them how to hate. And if more of our world leaders would maybe visit a daycare and watch the children, we might not have so many troubles in the world. Because children just don't hate. You have to teach them how to do that.
What about that, Bob?
Kids, you're right. Kids don't hate, but kids get angry, and they understand when adults get angry. Remember, a lot of the youngsters right now are feeling what the parents are feeling. Parents are angry, and then you wonder why your kid is angry, or parents are kind of shocked, and then you wonder why your kid's anxious. So really, getting a sense of what's going on has a lot to do with, first of all, getting your own thoughts together, getting your own emotions together, and then going to the child. But you're right, and that's why it's so difficult to do this, because as your correspondent was telling us, I mean, he doesn't want us to tell his kids. I don't either, but my God, this is the world that we gave them. I don't blame the teenagers for being mad at us, because in a sense, we didn't fix it, and it's their job to now make it a better place.
Mm-hmm. You know, we've kind of touched on this a little bit when we were talking about routines and the little girl who was put to bed, who was in tears, and you can tell there are some fears. What do you watch for in a child to see if they are struggling with this?
The child's mood will change. You know, if you know your child, you know kind of how they feel when they get upset. You know, the general mood. If you notice that there's been a change, the child's either more quiet or more hyper. If a child is afraid to go to bed at night, is kind of hesitant. If the child is having problems eating, especially if the child doesn't want to, you notice the child's around you a lot more. They keep looking at you. They don't want to leave your sight, because remember, for a child there are two senses of senses of security: the physical environment and the parents, and both of these are threatened in this disaster.
Okay, Sally from Virginia is on the phone with us. Hi, Sally.
Hi, I'm calling from Virginia Beach. This is a major military facility, and we've got a lot of kids that have parents that are in the military and are being affected directly by this. I have a child that I've been watching for a couple of days here. She's 9. She's real concerned because her dad's also involved. So I guess we sat down and talked to her, and the best we could come up with for a 9-year-old is that this is a neighborhood bully. This is the world's a bully. And the only way we can talk about it at that point is it's not for her to worry about it, that the adults will handle the bullies.
Is that effective, Bob? Now here you have a whole different situation. Kids with military families, that adds an extra worry.
Yeah, and it's a new worry, and the kids have not even gotten integrated in terms of this disaster, and now we're getting troops called up, reserves called up, and now we have a whole other sense of kids getting anxious, and we actually addressed that during the Gulf War. We had kids that couldn't talk about this, so we actually got little toy trucks, little toy soldiers, and we had them kind of play act what they were feeling. Some kids were so mad, we actually got a Saddam Hussein puppet and had them kick it and punch it and all that, because they were all getting all the anger out that way. But the point is, you have to tell them little bits. Just let them know when they ask you a question, answer it. But don't keep talking when they're kind of phased out. But again, we have another group of kids here who are now getting another anxiety and worry. Their dad is going to have to fight these bad people.
Mm-hmm. And then the kids who have lost a parent, perhaps, in the horrific terrorist action on Tuesday. And then that may spill over into other children who are afraid that they could lose their mom and dad. What about those kids?
Well, I mean, we're talking about two separate groups here. I mean, the tragedy of people who lose loved ones, I mean, this is a long-term therapy situation. I mean, this is something that's just devastating for a child to lose their mother or father. And this isn't something that we can, talk about in little tips. It's just a question of these people are going to need long-term professional help.
Well, and that's one of the things I wanted to ask you, too. I mean, it could be, we say moms and dads, but it could be moms, dads, grandparents, uncles, aunts, brothers, sisters, all the people who have been hurting so greatly. How long do you keep talking to kids? Do you keep talking to adults? Do you keep offering this support?
Research shows that after disasters such as Oklahoma City, years after, they see alcohol rates go up, divorce rates go up, domestic abuse goes up. When the counselors, as they're descending into New York and Washington, start doing their therapy, they have to remember, don't leave. Don't go in a month when this story maybe not be the primary thing to focus on, because they're going to need permanent counseling centers for a long time, especially for those people that not just lost loved ones, but people that knew loved ones and had families or had groups of friends at the workplace, and now they're left and no one else is there.
Yeah, the kids who are frightened, the adults who are frightened, it'll go on and maybe go through even stages of grief.
Things that we may not even know of, because this is much more horrific than what we've studied in the past.
Your best advice to someone who's suffering tonight or has children to talk to, listen.
Listen, love, and I know it's not very fashionable for therapists to say, but go to church and pray and talk to people that you haven't talked with before, and just get other people to help you hold yourself up, because you can't do it alone.
Yep, been a lot of that going on. Need to keep it up. Bob Butterworth, child psychologist, joining us from Los Angeles tonight. A pleasure to have you with us and try to help us with this and help other folks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paula.
And Dr. Butterworth, along with our other guests, certainly for these last couple of hours, want to thank them as well. General Wesley Clark, M.J. Gohel of the Asia Pacific Foundation, and of course, thanking all of you. We're so glad that you could be with us tonight. If you called in, and even if you didn't get a chance to air your question or comment, we're glad you were